For 14 years, I lived what I thought was a normal, happy life. A stable job in finance that paid the bills, a loving wife, and a son I adored. 3 years ago, my mother-in-law moved in after her divorce, making our family home a little more crowded, but still comfortable. Life was routine: work, home, dinners together, weekends with our boy. I never had a reason to question any of it. That Friday night, it was just the three of us, my wife, my mother-in-law, and me. Our son was at a sleepover, and we indulged in a little too much wine, conversations flowing freely. Then, somewhere between reminiscing and idle chatter, my wife said it. The words were so absurd, so cruelly casual, that I almost laughed at the ridiculousness of it. He's not your child. He never was. The room spun. I blinked at her, waiting for the punchline, but she just sipped her wine, smirking. It had to be a joke. What was she talking about? Her mother chuckled, shaking her head. You were just the better provider. Like that, they unraveled my entire world in a single moment, speaking as though recounting some clever scheme they had pulled off years ago. They told me everything. How my wife had slept with her ex just before our wedding, planning it carefully to ensure I never suspected a thing. How I was the safe option, the man with the steady paycheck and good benefits. How easy it was because I had never questioned anything. My wife laughed again. The best part is how you never even thought to ask. I had no words. No anger. Just an all-consuming numbness as I listened. The betrayal wasn't just in their deception, but in their complete lack of remorse. I didn't scream, didn't smash anything. Instead, I asked questions, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. Does he know? My wife scoffed. Of course not. And there's no reason for him to. Her mother nodded, smiling as if reassuring me. You've been a better father than his real one ever could be. I couldn't take it. I muttered something about needing air and left. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind a whirlwind of pain, memories, and the cold realization that my life had been a lie. When I finally returned, they were both asleep, completely unfazed by what had happened. I went straight to my office, shut the door, and called my lawyer's emergency line. By morning, everything was set in motion. DNA test ordered, will updated, financial records secured. I hadn't told my son anything yet. He wasn't to blame for any of this. He was still my boy, DNA be damned. But my wife and her mother? They were dead to me. The DNA kit arrived the next day. I swabbed my son's cheek, telling him it was for a workplace health study. He didn't question it, just grinned and let me do it. My wife wasn't home, which was intentional. I sent the kit off with overnight shipping. Money talks, and my lawyer ensured the results would be rushed. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances. Acted normal. Ate dinner with them. Helped with homework. Every moment was suffocating, like watching a play where I no longer belonged. My wife noticed my distant mood and, on Wednesday night, tried to initiate intimacy. I made an excuse about work and turned away. Thursday, my mother-in-law eyed me suspiciously, commenting on how off I seemed. Too late for that. By Friday, I packed a bag and left for a fake business trip, booking a hotel 30 minutes away. My lawyer confirmed that by Saturday morning, the results would arrive. And they did. 0% biological match. Along with the results was a letter, direct, emotionless. Filing for divorce on the grounds of fraud. Complete documentation of assets. A statement making it clear that, despite no biological connection, I intended to fight for visitation rights. A demand that my wife and mother-in-law vacate the house within 30 days. By 10:13 a.m., the courier arrived. My wife signed. By 10:17, my phone started ringing. I ignored it. By noon, there were 18 missed calls from her, 7 from her mother, 3 from unknown numbers, likely her friends. The texts flooded in. You need to come home right now. This isn't funny. You can't just send something like this and disappear. Your son is asking where you are. That last one cut the deepest. Because yes, he was still my son. By Saturday night, the missed calls had climbed to 31. By Sunday morning, 47. I didn't answer a single one. My lawyer had advised complete radio silence until everything was officially filed. From the voicemails and texts, I gathered that my wife was panicking. She claimed she had been drunk and hadn't meant it. Her mother dismissed it as overreacting and destroying the family over nothing. But they weren't worried about me. They were worried about losing the house, the money. Not once did they apologize for what they had done. I stayed in the hotel one more night. By Monday morning, my lawyer filed everything. By afternoon, I drove home, my heart pounding. I nearly turned around twice, but I knew I had to face them. Both their cars were in the driveway. Inside, they were seated at the kitchen table, surrounded by rental listings and my lawyer's letter. My wife looked up, her expression accusatory. "So, you're really doing this?" she asked. "You didn't leave me much choice," I replied. Her mother stood up, voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. It was just drunk talk. You're throwing away 14 years over nothing." "Nothing." My voice was quieter than I expected. "You lied to me about my son's paternity for 12 years. That's nothing." My wife's eyes filled with tears. "You're still his father in all the ways that matter." I clenched my jaw. "Yes, I am, which is why I'm fighting for visitation." That set them off. Voices rising. Accusations. Begging. Pleading. My wife cried, the same woman who had laughed while confessing. But I had already mourned the life I thought I had. The only thing left was to protect my son from the wreckage they had created. For 14 years, I lived under the illusion of a stable and loving family. A steady job in finance provided for my wife, our 12-year-old son, and in recent years my mother-in-law, who had moved in after her divorce. Life followed a predictable rhythm: work, home, dinner, weekends spent with our boy. I never had a reason to question any of it. That Friday night, with our son away at a sleepover, my wife, her mother, and I enjoyed a rare evening alone, drinking more wine than we should have. The conversation wandered, laughter filled the air, and then, in the most offhand manner, my wife dropped a sentence that shattered my world. "He's not your child." "He never was." I stared at her, convinced it had to be a joke. But she just sipped her wine, smirking. Her mother chimed in, nodding with a knowing smile. "You were just the better provider." They explained it so easily, so casually, as if recounting a well-played trick. How my wife had been with her ex just before our wedding, carefully planning the timing, so I'd never suspect. How I had been chosen, not for love, but for financial stability. How it had all worked out so perfectly because I had never questioned a thing. "The best part," my wife said with a chuckle, "is how you never even thought to ask." I felt like I was drowning, but I stayed silent, asking only what needed to be asked. "Does he know?" "Of course not," she scoffed. "And there's no reason for him to." Her mother nodded in agreement. "You've been a better father than his real one ever could have been." I couldn't breathe. I muttered something about needing air and left the house, driving aimlessly for hours, trying to grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. When I finally returned, they were asleep, unbothered, untouched by the devastation they had left in their wake. I went straight to my office, closed the door, and called my lawyer's emergency line. By morning, the gears were in motion. DNA test ordered, legal documents revised, financial records secured. My son didn't know yet. He was innocent in all of this, still my boy, DNA be damned. But my wife and her mother? They were strangers to me now. The DNA kit arrived the next day. I swabbed my son's cheek, told him it was for a family health study through work. He grinned, unbothered, trusting. I sent the kit off with overnight shipping. My lawyer ensured the results would be rushed. Meanwhile, I continued as if nothing had changed. Work, home, dinner, helping with homework, all while suffocating under the weight of my own silence. My wife noticed the distance, tried to bridge it with small talk, even intimacy. I refused. My mother-in-law watched me carefully, sensing something was off. Too late for that. By Friday, I packed a bag and left for a fake business trip, staying in a hotel 30 minutes away. My lawyer called Saturday morning. The results had arrived. 0% biological match. A courier delivered the results to my wife, along with a letter. The message was simple and final: DNA proof, divorce papers filed, complete documentation of assets, and a demand that she and her mother vacate the house within 30 days. By 10:13 a.m., she had signed. By 10:17, my phone erupted with calls. I ignored them all. By noon, there were 18 missed calls from her, 7 from her mother, 3 from unknown numbers, likely her friends. The texts flooded in, demanding answers. "You need to come home right now. This isn't funny. You can't just send something like this and disappear. Your son is asking for you." That last one hurt the most. Because yes, he was still my son. By Sunday morning, the missed calls had climbed to 47. My lawyer advised complete silence until everything was officially processed. From voicemails and messages, I gathered that my wife was in full panic mode. She insisted she had been drunk and hadn't meant it. Her mother dismissed my reaction as overreacting and destroying the family over nothing. But not once did they express regret for the lie itself, only for the consequences. I returned home Monday afternoon, my heart pounding. Both their cars were in the driveway. Inside, they sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by my lawyer's letter and rental listings. My wife's expression was accusatory. "So, you're really doing this?" she asked. "You didn't leave me much choice," I said calmly. Her mother scoffed, crossing her arms. "This is ridiculous. It was just drunk talk. You're throwing away 14 years over nothing." I inhaled sharply. "Nothing." My voice was cold. "You lied to me about my son's paternity for 12 years. That's nothing." My wife's eyes filled with tears. "You're still his father in all the ways that matter." "Yes," I agreed. "Which is why I'm fighting for visitation." That set them off. Yelling, pleading, crying. But I had already grieved the life I thought I had. I let them wear themselves out before speaking again. "I've arranged for a hotel for both of you, starting tonight. The divorce papers are filed. My lawyer will contact yours. You have 30 days to move out." My mother-in-law's face turned red. "You can't just kick us out. This is my home too." "Actually, it's not," I said evenly. "You're not on the lease, you pay no rent, and you have no legal right to be here. The hotel is a courtesy." My wife's tears vanished. "What about our son?" she asked. "He's coming home soon." "I'll be here," I said. "I think it's best if you're not." They argued more, cried more. But then the real question came. "How are we supposed to live?" my wife demanded. "You know I can't afford a place on my own." And there it was. Not concern for our son. Not regret. Just fear of losing the financial security I had provided. "You were right about one thing," I told her. "I am a good provider. But now I'm providing for my son. Not for you." They left with overnight bags. I made them return their house keys through the doorbell camera. Then came the hardest part. At 3:30, my son walked in, confused to see only my car in the driveway. I sat him down, told him I loved him, and always would. Explained that his mother and I were divorcing. He cried. Asked why. I told him sometimes adults grow apart, but it wasn't his fault. That both of us would always be there for him. I didn't tell him about the DNA test. Not yet. His world was already unraveling. That night, as I cooked dinner, he asked in a small voice, "Is Mom leaving because of me?" I put everything down, looked him in the eyes, and said, "No, this is between adults. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will always, always be your dad." He hugged me hard. I barely held it together. 6 months have passed since that night. The divorce is final. The judge saw right through my ex's excuses. She received far less than she expected. My mother-in-law moved back to her hometown, spreading lies about me. I don't care. We found the biological father. He never knew. My lawyer contacted him, and he was shocked, then furious. My ex had lied to him, too, claiming she had miscarried before moving on to me. 2 men manipulated, 1 innocent child caught in the middle. My son now sees his biological father every other weekend. It was awkward at first, but they're building a bond. And through it all, my son and I have grown even closer. Love isn't about DNA. It's about showing up. And I always will.